if the key is to stop the entire world from doing something dangerous, you'd almost want global government.
Wait a minute. Why did Bill Gates just say that on his podcast? Welcome back to Jesus Now Eschatology. Today's topic is AI regulatory boards on an international scale. And this was a conversation being had between two of the world's most important people today, Bill Gates, the former CEO of Microsoft, and Sam Altman, the current CEO of OpenAI. Just yesterday, they published this episode of the Unconfuse Me podcast, which is a Bill Gates produced podcast that has a special guest about every other month. And right before Davos, here these two are together. I don't know, maybe they're both there a little early and had some time to record a podcast. But the conversation being had, when I heard what they were talking about, I realized, oh boy, this is something we're going to need to talk about. How do you regulate on an international scale tools that are even more powerful, some have said, than nukes? And so they get into that here. And in this section, they're talking about, have international regulatory bodies been effective at controlling the destructive power of nukes? And then extrapolating from that, how do we build better systems that can do an even better job controlling weapons that could be even potentially more destructive than even those? And so I want to take a listen in to a short segment of this podcast episode, and then we're going to talk about international regulatory bodies for AI. Here we go.
In terms of polarization. And, even now, I'm not sure how we deal with that.
I don't understand why the government was not able to be more effective around social media, but it seems worth trying to understand as a case study for what they're going to go through now with AI.
No, it's a good case study. And when you talk about the regulation, is it clear to you what sort of regulations would be constructive?
I think we're starting to figure that out. It would be very easy to put way too much regulation on this space. And, you can look at lots of examples of where that's happened before. But also, if we are right, and we may turn out not to be, but if we are right and this technology goes as far as we think it's going to go, it will impact society, geopolitical balance of power, so many things that for these still hypothetical but future extraordinarily powerful systems, not like GPT-4, but something with 100,000 or 1,000,000 times the compute power of that, we have been socializing the idea of a global regulatory body that looks at those super powerful systems.
Just realize what he said. We're socializing this idea of a super governmental regulatory board that is overseeing these types of things. You're talking about systems that are more powerful even still than what's currently available, and approaching systems that are just immensely capable. And so there has to be some kind of regulatory boards above these. And they kind of make some comments in the early part of this interview about how government didn't really do such a great job controlling social media, which was just such a small part of what AI is able to deliver in terms of news feeds and things that are tailored to a person. And so when you start to take these tools and stretch them even larger, they have even larger implications for people globally. And so they're talking about how there's really a growing movement toward getting some regulation in this space that is internationally binding. Let's take a listen to the next part.
Because they do have such global impact. And one model we talk about is something like the IAEA. So for nuclear energy, we decided the same thing. This needs a global agency of some sort because of the potential for global impact. I think that could make sense. There'll be a lot of shorter term issues of what are these models allowed to say and not say? How do we think about copyright? Different countries are going to think about those differently, and that's fine.
Some people think, okay, if there are models that are so powerful, we're scared of them. The reason nuclear regulation works globally is basically everyone, at least on the civilian side, wants to share safety practices, and it has been fantastic. When you get over into the weapons side of nuclear, you don't have that same thing. And so if the key is to stop the entire world from doing something dangerous, you'd almost want global government, which today for many issues like climate, terrorism, we see that it's hard for us to cooperate. And people even invoke sort of US-China competition to say why any notion of slowing down would be inappropriate. So isn't it going to be hard any idea of slowing down or going slow enough to be careful will be hard to enforce?
Yeah, I think
Okay, so he's talking about the challenges even just to get current systems regulated internationally. Even I think he didn't say it right here, but the World Health Organization, I mean, you have other types of things other than just nuclear energy that are trying to be regulated at an international level. But when you have competing interests, all of a sudden it gets really hard to regulate something internationally. Whose interests are those international policies aligned with most? And then you have severe effects on those economies and so on and so forth. There's a lot of trickle down from especially this conversation with regulations. Here's the big case in point on that. If one country decides that they're going to regulate AI and they're slowing everything down, and this country over here decides that they're not going to slow down, this country goes way beyond everybody else in the world and ends up having a competitive advantage economically, but also potentially militarily, and also potentially in a lot of other ways that we're going to look at. But that's why the idea of regulation has been met with such resistance from people who are creating these tools. It's because they're saying things like, if we don't do it, someone else will. And so therein you have the struggle and the challenge of regulation. And they're going to talk a little bit more about this, and then they're going to kind of go on to something else. But we're going to stay on regulation here today.
if it comes across as asking for a slowdown, that'll be really hard. If it instead says, okay, do what you want, but any compute cluster above a certain extremely high power threshold, and given the cost here, we're talking maybe 5 in the world, something like that. Any cluster like that has got to submit to the equivalent of international weapons inspectors. And the model there has to be made available for safety audit, pass some tests during training and before deployment.
When I heard him say this, the first time I listened to this podcast, I was like, bro, did you just say that? Like, he wants there to be inspections on this equipment that is akin to, yes, nuclear inspections that are happening on weapons and energy systems. I'm like, okay, he gets it. This is the guy, folks. He is at the top of open AI. He understands what these things are capable more than even I do. And he's saying you got to keep a close tabs on these and have inspections. And once something gets to a certain power threshold, it is very dangerous. So a little more, and then we're going to make some more comments.
That feels possible to me. I wasn't that sure before, but I did a big trip around the world this year, talked to heads of state in many of the countries that would need to participate in this, and there was like almost universal support for it. So I think that's not going to save us from everything. There are still going to be things that are going to go wrong with much smaller scale systems. In some cases, probably pretty badly wrong. But I think that can help us with the biggest tier of risks.
Now, there's an interesting thing too. I noticed he just said that he went traveling around the world and he met with these heads of state, and that he had a lot of support, almost complete support for his idea of building a regulatory body that would manage the world's global risk to super powerful AIs. Now, that's not talking about the AI that's making a picture of your cat with a spacesuit on. That's talking about types of AI systems that are capable of synthesizing pathogens, types of AIs that are capable of constructing extra powerful weapon systems that are potentially risky to all of humanity. It's talking about AI systems that are at a military grade level, able to influence people's thought at global scale and commit potentially economic crimes and so on and so forth. He's talking about very powerful systems and how we need to get a handle on those quickly. Okay, so I want to take a sidestep over to a guy who was talking about this a little earlier, who's also involved at Davos and the World Economic Forum, Yuval Noah Harari. Now, he had multiple interviews this year that I had listened to, but he talks a lot about the need for an international regulatory board over AI. And a couple of his quotes from one of his interviews was he said that's a very big issue. I mean, we don't have the regulatory bodies in place. This is what we need to establish as soon as possible. So when you got the kind of right-hand man of the World Economic Forum saying we need to establish these as soon as possible, I believe that was a 2023 quote. Reason Logic says that's a high priority for him. He's probably going to talk about it when he gets everyone together in 2024. And so you have the Davos Convention meeting this next week. You can bet that's a priority for him and people like, yes, Bill Gates and Sam Altman also. Sam travels the world to try to build consensus around an idea of an international regulatory board for AI. And you can see that he's getting a lot of traction with that idea. Yuval says, with the AI revolution, you don't need to send soldiers into a country in order to basically conquer it. You just need to take the data out. You can control it from afar. So when we talk about regulation, it's not just the issue of a national government with its corporations. It's also a global issue of how all these countries that they are not really competitors in the AI race, how are they going to face the consequences? Because obviously the technology will impact everyone, not just the front ones, or not just those who have the technology, but also those who don't have the technology. And so here we get to that issue that we mentioned yesterday about the quantum gap. You have, potentially governments that have these tools and have these powers, and they're able to then set up a power imbalance that is massive between governments that have the tools and governments that don't have the tools. And the potential for there to be a lot of mistreatment by those who have the tools towards those who don't have the tools is high. The degree of likelihood of there being oppressiveness or even acts of violence between these two in the power imbalance is statistically likely, especially when you have the ability, like you said, you don't have to send in troops anymore. You can just cut the data, you can cut the internet, and you can impact people financially in a massive way. We've already seen governments doing that in the last couple years, cutting internet right ahead of elections, cutting internet right ahead of important things or after important things have happened in the country. And so you see already a growing precedent for this type of warfare, this type of really governments controlling the flow of information towards their benefit and away from maybe others' benefit. Let's take a look now at tiers of AI systems and the corresponding regulatory need for those types of systems. You may be aware that AI is actually coming to laptops. You go and buy your college student a laptop, and you are getting a consumer grade level of AI integrated into the device starting this next year. And that's able to do things like short text. It's able to do things like small image modification types of things on the device. So the device no longer has to communicate to the cloud and back, but it's able to do a lot of this sort of generative process on the device itself. And this is what I would refer to as consumer grade AIs. These are not really capable of as much because they're limited to the compute power. Basically, let me explain it this way. When this tool is made, when an AI is made, a certain amount of computer power is going into this system to make it. And the amount of compute power that went into it to create the system determines how much that is able to do. So basically at GPT-3 and GPT-3.5, you have what I would say is the kind of the kernel of AI, but it's not like ultimately capable. It's basically capable, basic functions, and that's about it. That would be the consumer grade AIs. And this is what's available even right now on the open source community. You can get these types of things without going to OpenAI to get them. They're available pretty much for free. So I took a picture of a college and represent this one with a college. This is your college student's AI. The amount of regulation needed, pretty much none, because we have systems in place that are keeping it pretty well under control, and there's already guardrails around these systems that keep it from talking about things like pathogens and synthetic chemistries and whatever. When you go over to the commercial grade AI systems, you're talking about things that would require a data center, maybe something that is used in Wall Street for stock trading, or something that's used by a biotech lab to test various medicines, or self-driving vehicles, self-driving fleets might fall into this sector. And the commercial grade stuff is more powerful than just your college students' AI. You're talking about data centers that are devoted to this compute and this type of thing. I mean, they're very much more capable in terms of their raw outputs, and the amount of money it took to train those commercial grade models is more. You're talking not in the open source free space, but you're talking millions of dollars at least to build and train these models. And that commercial grade stuff requires a little bit more oversight. We wouldn't want to have companies abusing this. And so, but governments are still catching up to this. Okay, how do we regulate, when we have articles online that aren't written by a human and they're passing those off, and those are getting a lot of virality, potentially fake news getting a lot of virality. How do you regulate self-driving cars? And there's a lot of that type of question happening around the commercial grade stuff, but it's really a question in the millions of dollars. Mistakes made at the commercial level are probably impacting lives in the hundreds and in the thousands. But once you get above the commercial grade AI, you're starting to get to technologies that affect not just thousands and maybe tens of thousands, but millions of people. And that's the military or government grade AIs. Now, we actually don't know fully what the military has access to, but we know that they have quantum hardware, at least our military does. And so the effect of that, the ability of this system now to do not just economic function, but decide who lives and dies, is what's at stake. You're talking about computers that could create weapons. You're talking about computers that could destroy massive parts of the internet, or even make life miserable for other people with synthetic biologies. And I think we have a pretty growing shared suspicion that the Chinese government was using some of these tools around that time, if you know what I mean, to do synthetic biologies, gain of function research, that type of thing. I mean, now you're talking that these powers left unchecked are going to cause international catastrophes. Potentially, if some of these biotech labs are able to use their AI tools to create pathogens that are then spread globally, you could make life miserable for billions of people, and there isn't sufficient oversight over the military grade applications for this technology as it stands right now. So people are seeing that. Bill Gates is seeing that. Sam Altman is seeing that. They're saying, okay, what are we going to do so this doesn't become a big issue? And how do we keep, the college student on the laptop from getting access to this type of AI? How do we keep the commercial sector from getting access to this type of AI? How do we segment out the development and the use of AI so that there's everyone operating within their respected use and their trusted use for that equipment? I don't let the college student go sit down at the nuclear missile silo and play around with buttons, right? It's because that's not his trained sector. It's not what he's trusted to do. It's not what he's supposed to do. I leave that to the military generals and people of that level of respect and trustability, right? Similar to how even in the commercial sector, I guess, only certain people have access to the terminals at Wall Street. It's not just anybody who walks in the building, right? You have to have certain credentials. But what we're seeing now, and Sam brought this up, is you have compute clusters that are actually hundreds of thousands of times and even millions of times more powerful than these other types of AIs. And so really what they're moving towards is an international grade of AI systems that are needing now to have the ability, at least, to suppress other users of other AI classes from doing things they're not supposed to do with AIs. This international governance board is going to try to keep there being only 5 to 7 quantum computers globally. If you want to think about what Sam said and read between the lines there, he says that there's about 5 of these computers maybe globally. I would suggest that there's probably more than that, considering how many colleges are developing these and other governments. But suffice to say, those devices are so much more powerful than the military grade ones even. And you're talking not development cost in the millions of dollars, you're talking about development cost in the billions of dollars. The amount of money it takes to train that AI model is in the billions. Okay, so it's even hard to wrap my mind around it, but you're talking about so much computing power, so much data, and so much hardware that has gone into training these models that these things can't afford to get into the wrong hands at this point. There can really only, I think, be one network at the top. These devices that are working on being the only devices at the top have to then actively work to keep other AIs from ever reaching this level. There can only be one singularity network of this type, because anyone else who ever achieves this level of computational power and supremacy is then capable of dominating everything. Because once you have this level, you can break the encryptions of all computers. You can know all of the data that's being sent across the internet, because you can break the encryption of that data. And so everything is accessible to these people at the international grade of AIs. And we're not even that far away at this point. And that's why Sam and Bill are having this conversation. It's because we have to arrive at some mechanism internationally that is sufficient to contain the power of those systems so that they don't create world chaos. And how do you even do that? And who's at the top? Because you have a system that is very much like an exponential curve. Your college students are using AI tools to make their lives 20% better, 50% better. You have companies that are maybe, firing employees and saving lots of money. And I have my great ethical concerns about what that leads to. Then you have your governments. They're using tools to really change the world, and they're maybe maximally effective because of their use of those tools. But once you get to the supremacy level, you're now having tools that can destroy all of the tools on the planet. You have devices that could hack every single thing on the planet, every single economy on the planet, every single bank account on the planet, and not even blink to do it. You're talking trillions of times faster and trillions of times more powerful than supercomputers. That's not even a hyperbole. That's actual data. It is that much faster, that much more powerful. And I don't say that to scare us, but I say that to kind of bring light to why there's a need for segmentation that these guys are talking about. From a Christian framework that I operate from, which I believe is a good one, the Bible's been around for a long time and it's stood the test of time, even in this world of AIs when people want to rewrite it and do away with it and so on and so forth. I see that this all lines up almost exactly with what the Bible describes. Alex Jones, whether you like him or hate him, went on the record to say it's like we have people out there who have the book of Revelation open and they're like building the world according to that script. Maybe it's because that was the script, Alex. Maybe that's because this is what God foretold and all of his words will be accomplished. But I guess I see, and this is my take, is that all of this seems to line up very closely with what the Bible describes in terms of a one world system that does have the capability of economic function and does have the pretense for worship, as we've looked at in previous videos. And it seems like it's all going according to what the book of Revelation has to say about this. And I think there's a really importance for discussion and discernment about this, because I would caution you that the outcome to dismiss this amount of evidence and this amount of data about this, the consequence of dismissal is dire. And yet I have people ask me every day, so what? What do we do differently if we know this? I think the so what of these days, it is to keep watch and be ready for the return of Christ. It is to be realizing that we are entering that time in history when no one can work, as Jesus said. He says, while it's day, I must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. And it seems like we're getting towards this night where there are people in the world who could destroy the lives of Christians economically if they don't adhere to their programs. And that seemed like such a far-fetched idea. Even when I was a kid, I was looking at some of these tools being developed and thinking, like that's awful interesting. But I think now it's gone from the realm of interesting to the realm of people are having these conversations. People are looking to create an international regulatory board, and who is going to be at the helm of that board. We already saw, even just in our video about sentience and alignment, which I'm going to make another video about as well, how an AI only serves to amplify the value set and the belief set of the people who created it. So if these are the people you're sourcing your data from, guess what? Their opinions, their values are transmitted through the AI system to others. And as the Google guy famously exposed, what do those things have to say about religion? What do those things have to say about other value sets? Because once people start to trust the AI and what it's saying, they're just going to go with it. It's like Google. They're just going to believe it. Right? But you see, I guess, a difference here emerging. Because the people at the top, once they get these tools, they're going to be saying, this is the way it is. This is what you all have to believe. This is what you all have to agree to. This is what we all, as the world, need to set as our value sets. And you have that way going, very much this direction. And you, I believe, have God's way going very much this direction. And you have to choose. Who am I going to follow? Am I going to follow the person with the all-powerful tools and people who have, prosperity and everything going their way from these powerful tools they've helped get them going that way? Or am I going to follow Jesus Christ, what he said, how he told me to live, and what he told me to watch out for in his world and in his word and in the world? Am I going to listen to the book of Revelation when it talks about the mark of the beast, for example? And if people come on the scene and start asking for people to receive this so that they can be connected to these systems, what is my degree of resistance? Because I look around and, getting back to the question, why does it matter? I look around and I see a lot of people who, it doesn't seem like they're prepared to make a resistance against that type of system. It's almost like they don't believe it's going to happen, or they don't believe that it's going to affect them or something. Maybe they think that it's still a long ways off. And in these rooms, such as Davos next week, we already looked at how they're talking about quantum supremacy. And I really think that we all need to be careful about who they appoint to the top of that. Whoever gets assigned to this regulatory board as the chair of it will influence thought globally, will influence policy globally, will influence economies globally. And we need to have some readiness for that. So what do? Well, go out and plant a tree, as Martin Luther maybe would say. But I think even more, have readiness, have conviction, and have really a strong sense of trust in the Word of God, because we see things happening pretty much as the Bible says they would happen. And that's pretty remarkable, considering the book of John was almost written, book of Revelation was almost written 2,000 years ago. How accurate to these times. And even just, you have other things in that book that are just so accurate to these times. It talks about the witnesses, how they'll be killed and left for dead on the street for 3 days. And it says all the world will see them, every tribe. How is that possible without the internet, without video? These things where everybody on the planet could see that these people died. That's pretty profound. And it's almost like the video systems that we currently have in these days were foretold. And so I see that. I see a lot of this, of what was foretold, starting to kind of happen and converge. And it makes me actually have hope and trust in the Word of God. So I'm not afraid. I think I would be a little bit cautious or afraid of people who would ignore the data that exists in front of us now. I mean, at this point, some of this is going from that realm, again, of speculation or could possibly happen, to people having these conversations in the real world that have effect on all of us. So keep your eyes on the skies. Wait for Jesus. He said he's going to come, and he's going to take his church to be with him. And I know that what the Bible says isn't popular in the world. Jesus said it wouldn't be popular, but I believe it all the same. And it is the Word of God, and it is the answer even for these times that we live in that are very trying. Take care, guys. God bless.